Hi everybody, it's Christine and I am back for part 2 of our coloring in Fabulous Flowers. But before we did that, I wanted to tell you about this book. Now this is the book that I rescued from the dollar store. It was there for 50 cents. It's probably the best 50 cents I've ever spent. If you have a chance to get this, or if you've read it, I'd love to talk to you about it. But if you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it. I recommend any of Mitch Albom's books because they are, he's just a marvelous storyteller. Plus they're about people, and they're about the connections between people and how those connections aren't always seen. As with all of his books, I'm not going to tell you really what it's about, other than Frankie Presto is a musician. He plays the guitar, and his strings are magic. And like all of Mitch Albom's books, have during the last 20 pages, have at least a half a box of tissues sitting next to you, and know that you will go through them. It took me about 2.5 hours to read the last 20 pages of the book, because it is touching and thought-provoking and all kinds of things. But I can really, really recommend it. 500 pages of some pretty darn good reading. And it just seems like it flew by. It was so good. I, only allowed myself tiny sips of it. A couple of chapters every night, kind of thing. Because I really just didn't want it to end. And so I hope he writes another one very soon. I will definitely be buying it. And I have not done a thing on this since yesterday, or actually this morning, when I posted the first part of it. So it is 5:49 in the morning, and May is going to start her stream in about 10 minutes my time. May Brox over at May Brox's channel. So I'm going to take a little break and attend that stream. But I think we can probably do at least one thing in that 10 minutes. And I don't know exactly what that'll be, but we'll figure it out. How is everybody today? It is Tuesday. It is dark outside here. I don't really know what the weather's supposed to be. I know it's in the 30s or something overnight, which just seems ridiculously cold to me for this particular time of year. But you just never know. I wish it was a little bit warmer. I know. Let's do a couple of the pearls. We can slap a couple of those out in no time flat. Zooming down, and I think that looks pretty good for focus. Okay, now on these, I did find that it is best to start with the violet, and we'll go over here to this one. And this is basically just a kind of a repeat of what we've done, only because it's a pearl, instead of being translucent, it is pearlescent. And really all that means is that it is the highlight is a little higher up on the pearl. So we lay some of that down. That, by the way, was the 932 Violet. I have not forgotten that I promised you a story. I will, in fact, tell one in the more extended part of this after May's stream, when I come back to do the second piece of this video. And so that one was the Parma Violet 1008. And this is the Lilac, which is 956. And since these are so little, they don't really take that long. Okay, now go back to the darker color. And come in around the edges. Thank you to everyone who availed themselves of the Etsy sale. And I guess Cyber Monday was a huge success here in the United States. I hope it was all over the world. I did not sell as many books as I had hoped to, but since I won't see any of those book royalties until February, because it takes that, well, I guess, yeah, till February. They come in on January 29th, which might as well be February. At least I know I won't starve. So thank you for all of you Amazon buyers, too. Okay, looking good. Darken that up just a tiny, tiny bit. How does that look? Does it look okay to you? Looks okay to me too. Okay, in that case then, I am going to do another one. How about this one down here? I also wanted to say that I do watch back my videos at least once, even after I've edited them. And one of the things that I forgot to put in, I always mean to do this, because I tend to think out loud and talk fairly slowly. I find that when I watch back my videos, I like to set the speed at either 1.25 or at 1.50, because I'm still perfectly understandable at the increased speed, but it gives the illusion that I'm thinking much more clearly than I do. If you watch it. If you watch it back at the higher speed. So so if you want to do that, you should. And that's in your, just hit that little gear looking thing that's there, and go up to speed and choose either 1.25 or 1.5, and it'll speed up the replay. And trust me, it's just much nicer if you do that. Otherwise, I sound like I'm dithering. Of course, I am dithering, but okay. I am loving this piece. I really am. Gemstones are one of my favorite things to color. Probably because I'm fairly confident with them. Okay. And now I will take a very short break. Join May. You won't even know I'm gone. Trust me. Hi everybody, I'm back, and May's stream was amazing, as always. She was coloring today from Misfits, and using NEOCOLOR IIs and polychromos, and it was just a cute unicorn fish thing. Like a unicorn seahorse, and a little girl. And I love the way that she does water, and brings in the white Posca to take out the harsh black lines in the waves. And so that was fun. That actually was this morning, and it is now evening, but because I had other work that I needed to get done today, since it is a work day. But now I get to go back to my pleasure of coloring. Oh, one of the other corrections that I wanted to make to part one is I had put in a footer about a metaphor that had run amok, and what I meant was an analogy. Words are important. Sorry, I didn't realize that you were still stuck way up there. Shout out if the focus is out. I'll hear you, I promise. Okay. Okay, that should be better. I also messed around a little bit with the pardon me, with the light settings. So if it's too dark, I haven't decided if it's too dark, but I was trying to get it so that it would show up for you in a little bit closer to the real colors. Because the camera washes stuff out. And I'm really only using 2 colors on these little ones.
Anyway, so it's been a good day. How about you? Did you have a good day? I hope that you did. I know that here in America, a cold weather, really cold weather, has been wreaking all kinds of havoc with travel the last few days. I know a lot of people got stuck and could not get home from their Thanksgiving trips, primarily because it snowed in what we call the northern part of the Midwest. So states like Illinois and Wisconsin and just got slammed, and the airports were closed, and Chicago O'Hare, of course, sees a lot of traffic. So I feel bad for those folks who had a traumatic time getting home. And our weather is going to be in the 20s tonight. 20 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that translates to in Celsius, but let's just say it's cold. And I promised you a story. So I was thinking about that. And probably one of the most interesting stories that I have sort of still left to tell is how I figured out who my mother was in the world. Because I have mentioned before in videos that she was not forthcoming about her past. And of course we've talked about my discovery of her family, which happened several years after her death, that I finally discovered them. But what I haven't told you is what set me on that journey. Because my mother's favorite phrase was, "You don't need to wonder about me. I sprang into the world fully grown, and that's all you ever need to know." Now, as a kid who studied books, or who read a lot of books, I had all kinds of lovely fantasies about that as a kid. That she was a witch of some kind who had traded a magical existence, for the opportunity to meet my mother, that kind of thing. And that was only fed by the fact that my sister, on one of her summer visits, because my sister loved my mother. There is no doubt about that. At a time when, when my sister could not count on her dad because he was still a drinking alcoholic before I was born, she could count on my mother. And And so they liked one another a great deal. And that lasted all the way through. And, you know, it's probably still true today that my sister loves my mother and loved my mother as my mother loved her. So, magical existence aside, I was 20 when my mother passed away. And she really, truly had not ever told me anything about herself. Well, that's not actually true. She did tell me once when I had been pestering her a lot that that she had a sister, and she even told me the sister's name. But then, a few years later, when I was, because remember that the legal drinking age in Arizona at the time was 19, and that's where we were living. She and I, on one memorable evening, did go out and tie one on together, basically. And at which point in time, there were two sisters. And while my memory of that evening is a little on the foggy side, I remembered that. So, back to what set me on my journey. Growing up, like all little kids, my favorite thing to do was to seek out secrets, and especially places where I wasn't supposed to go. And one of the places that I wasn't supposed to go was in my mother's bedroom. And so, of course, one day while she was out, I did snoop in her bedroom. And in a drawer, you know, in the nightstand drawer, next to where she slept, there were, in frames, a couple of pictures that I'd never seen her put out. One of them was of an older woman with a little boy. He looked like he was probably about maybe 10 years old. And it was a woman I'd never seen before. And the other one was a high school graduation picture of what looked like the little boy at 18. And of course, I couldn't ask her about them because then I'd have to admit that I'd been snooping in her drawers in her bedroom. But that sort of stuck with me. And she always had them, but they were never out. And even though it was a different house with different furniture in a different state, when she passed away, they were still there in that drawer. A nightstand drawer right next to her bed. Now, of course, by now, you all know who they were. But at the time, I didn't know, and she had never told me. So she'd been passed away about probably 2 years.
I'm pretty sure it was probably my 21st birthday or something. And my dad in California and my stepmother had a party for me. And all the family was there. My grandmother, my dad's mother, and my aunt and uncle, and all of those people. And even my sister was there, even though I think she'd probably, by then she, of course, because she's 13 years older than I am. So, my dad's first daughter. And I think she was probably in California on business, but was able to be there for this party. And by then she had 2 children, or at least 1 child. I think she only had her oldest boy at that point. She might have been pregnant with her second one by then. I'm not absolutely positive, because she got married when I was 16, so, and she had her first child when I was 20. So yeah, she only had 1. And I don't know why, but the conversation turned to my mother, and she said something to me about, well, don't you want to find out, don't you want to find out if your mother had any family or any of that? And I said no, I wasn't really that curious, and what did it matter anyway? And she said, well, what are you going to tell your children? I said, that's easy, I'm not going to have any children. And she said, well, what are you going to tell my children? And I thought, oh, okay, well, maybe I should find out. And so I really found out to be able to tell my sister's kids. Little did I know. Anyway, so my grandmother, my dad's mother, is the one that told me that she had actually met my mother's mother once. And the way that happened was when I was born, my dad and my grandmother, my dad and his mother, thought that it would be a good idea to try and reunite my mother with her mother. Because my dad knew that my mother and her mother were estranged, and had been for years. He didn't know why or what happened. He just knew that they had not spoken, although my mother did apparently write to somebody. I don't know whether or not it was her sister, or at the time, she did apparently write, at least to let them know that that she was going to have another baby, or a baby, me. And so my grandmother, my dad's mother, my paternal grandmother, decides that my maternal grandmother should be there. And somehow she gets an address and makes arrangements and has this woman come, and she's at the house when they bring me home from the hospital. And my grandmother said, my paternal grandmother said, what happened next is it made her realize what a bad mistake that she had made. Apparently my mother turned about 15 sheets of white and threw the woman out of the house. And on her way out the door, said, "You'll not get a hold of another one." And my dad remembered that. He never found out the mystery either. My mother would never tell him. And, or maybe she did and he just never told me. I don't know. But, so I'm listening, here I am, 21 years old, and I'm listening to, to my dad and my grandmother talking about this, and this is the first time I've heard any of it, and so now I'm intrigued. Now I'm going to solve this mystery. Who was this woman, and why did my mother hate her? Did she hate her? Or what was going on here? This was the deal. So my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, which is the only one that I've ever really known, told me that she and my maternal grandmother had been born in the same year. Now, they had been talking, apparently, by telephone about all of these arrangements, because my maternal grandmother apparently had to travel to get here. And that she had been a nurse. Or was a nurse, I guess, was the deal. So that is where that is all the information that I had. I knew what state she lived in. I knew what state she had lived in when I was born, which was 21 years earlier. I knew her first name. I knew my mother's maiden name. And that's where I started. And I knew she was a nurse. So I started out by writing to the state registrar of nurses. And I wrote this ridiculously long, like 3 typewritten pages letter about who I was, what I was seeking, the information that I was seeking, and why I wanted it. And I guess that there must have been something in that letter that made the state registrar of nurses of this particular state go completely above and beyond to try and track this woman down for me. And it was probably 2 years later that I get a phone call from a woman who was sad to report that my maternal grandmother had passed away, but that she had been her best friend in life, and
and that she supposed that my mother had told me about my brother. And I said, no, no, I've never heard anything about a brother. She said, oh, well, now, wait a minute. And she was an older woman. She was in a nursing home herself. And so she said, well, now, wait a minute. How did that story go? Oh, yeah, he's your uncle. That's what I'm supposed to say. He's your uncle. So she was the sweetest woman in the world. I will never forget. I talked to her for about 2 hours on the telephone. And, well, the first thing I did is reverse the charges. So I called her back so it wouldn't be on. This was at a time before we, of course, had unlimited long distance. And she was sweet. She told me all about her own family and some of the adventures that the nursing staff had had. As it turns out, my grandmother had worked for a maternity hospital. And, you know, in the war years, or the post-war years, and I think a perfect depiction of this is in the PBS show, The Midwives. I think it's called The Midwives. You know, there were a lot of advancements were made in those years, those post-war years. And so it was an exciting time to be a nurse in the maternity business. Sorry for the furnace noise. Grateful that it comes on. And so at any rate, we talked for, you know, several hours, a couple of hours anyway. And in the end, she left me with a phone number for my aunt, who was my mother's younger sister. Now, at this point in the story, I should tell you that I was aware that my mother had two sisters. Because I think I was in my teens, and my mother did tell me a story about how she was I don't exactly remember what precipitated it. I'm just going to throw in a little bit of cream right here just to make sure that I can maintain that lightness in the stone. But there is another part to this that goes to the trust issues between my mother and her mother, that involve another sister that was actually given away. But
that'll be a story for another day. At any rate, so this woman whose name was Lelia, 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 who had been my maternal grandmother's best friend, left me with a phone number for my aunt whose name was Lois. And now I had not forgotten about the stray earlier mistake of your mother told you about your brother, and I really didn't forget it 3 days later when I finally worked up the courage to call Lois and introduce myself. And she said exactly the same thing. I suppose your mother told you about your brother. And she too went back on it and said, no, he's your uncle. It was almost like she had screwed up and she caught herself and recovered. So now I'm really curious. Really, really curious. And it could not have been 20 minutes after I hung up the phone talking to her that the phone rings and it's him. He introduces himself as my uncle. And so that was interesting because, I don't have nearly enough concrete evidence of any kind to, to really believe that something fishy is going on here. Because he was as genuine gets, that he was my uncle. And that is who he thought he was. And it was I have to admit, it was very cool to go from having, just two stepsisters or two half-sisters to suddenly having a whole, an aunt and an uncle and cousins, because that was the first time in my life I had any cousins that weren't cousins by marriage. And so it was really cool. So now, all told, there's about 2.5 years invested in this whole search and for my mother's history. So it'll still be a few years until I actually work up both the desire and the excuse, because I'm a little like Attila the Hun. I need to have a pretext before I delve into the large issues of life. Attila needed a pretext to invade Rome, and he used the saving of the Roman princess who was being threatened by her brother, the emperor, as the catalyst for invading Rome. And I needed an excuse to invade these people's lives. And eventually, by this time I had already moved to Nevada. I had a very good friend whose name was Helen, and she and her husband Paul were really good friends of mine, and she said she'd go with me. That if I wanted to go, we'd make a trip of it, because Paul had an aunt who lived there, and in that state, and that, you know, we could visit her and make a real summer trip out of it. And so now I'm using some pink and just adding in a little bit of pink under the before I go for my next darkening up of this. And so that's what we did. We went to we went to Big Sky Country is what we did, and we had a really great time. In fact, Paul, his aunt, had been a cook on a working ranch. She was a ranch cook on a working cattle ranch, and had retired, and the ranch had bought her a little house in town as a retirement gift, basically. And kind of nice of them. And but she was used to cooking for huge groups, so we got there kind of late at night, and the next morning we woke up to breakfast. And I am telling you what, guys, you have never seen a breakfast like this unless you've lived on a ranch. There were pancakes, eggs, bacon, pork chops, English muffins. If you could think of it to eat, it was on that table. There was so much food that literally an army of human beings could not have eaten it all. And this was breakfast for 1, 2, 3, 4. There were only 4 of us at the table that morning. Oh, it was just hilarious. And so we spent a couple of days there, and that was a wonderful trip. And then we left Paul with his aunt, and Helen and I went over to the other side of the state and went visiting. And by this time, I suspected that this young man, or this person that I'd been talking to, who was my uncle, who identified himself as my uncle, was actually the boy in the photographs, the 10-year-old. And now I'd been putting all of this together over, the couple of years between the time that I first talked to them and the time that I actually went. That what if my grandmother was the woman in the photograph, the one from my mother's nightstand drawer, and the boy was my uncle? Well, that would make sense, right? But then, if that were the case, why would that be the only picture of my mother with her family, or of my mother's family? Why would she keep that and nothing else? So we get there, and sure enough, that same photograph is in his albums, and he identifies it as him. But I, what is for the first time in my life, go completely gutless. Completely gutless. And I don't say a word. Now, I should tell you that by this time, his wife, because I've talked to his wife on the phone several times by now, she knows what I suspect. She suspects it too. And nobody says a word to him. Not me, nobody. In the meantime, my friend Helen is kicking me under the table. But, I mean, how do you say to somebody, by the way, I don't think that your mother was your mother, and I don't think your father was your father. I think that you are somebody else entirely, and that, that your grandmother, or, yeah, that your mother is really your grandmother, and that she lied to you your entire life. You can't just say stuff like that, right? Not unless you're invited to, in some way. And I didn't feel invited, and the time wasn't right. Excuse me. I went around that, by the way, with that violet blue, that dark violet blue. And so we left. And I never did, I didn't say anything on that trip. And it wasn't until after we got back home to Nevada that, that I realized that I had really missed a good opportunity. But Helen understood. She knew why I didn't do it. It's a big step. We'd been talking about it the whole way up there, driving from where we lived in Nevada. And she was very understanding. She was a good friend. I have, in subsequent years, I have lost track of her. I wish I had not. I have looked for her several times, but I have not been able to find her. So at any rate, it was probably, now I'm doing the sienna brown around the edges of the gold. So it was a couple of, it might have been another couple of years later before I finally found the opening that I was looking for. In that we were talking about, Dawn and I were on the phone. His name was Dawn. Talking about family secrets. And I said, well, I think our family has a doozy of a secret. I said, I think you're my brother. I don't think you're my uncle. I think my mother was your mother. Now, at this point in time, I have finally reconciled myself to the idea that this suspicion may cost me my relationship with this person. but I can no longer remain silent about it. And silent is all I got from the other end of the phone. Just absolute dead. You could hear a pin drop silence. And I thought, oh no, I've really done it now. And when he finally did speak, what he said was, well, that would answer a lot of questions. So, apparently, he had always felt like the extra. The one that, the kid that wasn't supposed to happen. Which is true of a lot of the youngest kids. A lot of times if you are the child of older parents, because his mother, or, the woman that he grew up thinking was his mother, was 41 when he was born. Which at the time, it was fairly unusual for a woman of 41, and I say fairly because of course there are exceptions to every rule, generally having a child, which is one of the reasons why women, as we get older, now if we want to have babies when we're older, a lot of us are having to do the whole in vitro thing and all of that. So it was fair, but he had always felt like sort of this outsider. Like something had happened, he didn't have any control over it. It wasn't that anybody treated him badly, they just treated him differently. And so that's how I found my mother's family. And there is another fun part of that story. When we first got to, because I skipped right over the meeting Lois part, because she was the first stop that we made when we got into town. And what we didn't have was an address. Because up to then, we'd only ever communicated on the telephone. So they lived in a place called, I guess maybe I won't be that specific. Let's say they lived in a small town where everybody knew everybody. There were like 2 traffic signals. You could throw a rock from end to end. And so the deal was we'd pull into town and we'd stop at a payphone and call the house, and they would send somebody out to lead us in. Because, of course, in that part of the state, there were a lot of dirt roads. A lot of people lived on dirt roads. A lot of streets didn't have official names, that kind of thing. So, I wanted to show you that one of the things that I've done is I've enhanced the edges on this particular one. So I thought we'd do one of these since I'm done with this gemstone now. And So we pull into town and stop at the designated park where there are, pay phones. And it's nice to get out of the car and stretch my legs, because at that point in time we'd been driving for quite a long ways. So I do that. I spend about 5 or 10 minutes doing that. And then I pick up the phone and I call, and the line is busy. And so I wait another, 10, 15 minutes, and I try again, and the line is still busy. So this goes on for a couple of hours, and, the line is busy. We're getting hungry. We're getting a little annoyed. Helen is because she was, in fact, my first stop. I'm starting to think, well, maybe she's taken the phone off the hook because she's changed her mind and she really doesn't want to meet me after all. And sorry, I in a fit of not being able to think, and I'm trying to find the blues that I need for this, because it's a blue-green, and I've got blues and purples, but I have no, I can't seem to get a handle on what it is I'm looking for. Alright, I need we'll come back to that in a second. I need the peacock blue, which is the 1027. I've got the ultramarine. I don't know that I'm going to need it. I know I want the parrot green. Is that right? No, it's not. Get that ultramarine out of there. And there's the peacock blue. Get the parrot green out of there for a second. There it is. The peacock blue, the aquamarine, the light aqua. Now I know why I'm looking at those purples, because these are the purples. The violet and the lilac and the Parma violet. So believe it or not, all 6 of these are in this, plus the violet blue and the mulberry. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that is the case. Okay. And the processed red. So that can't possibly be true, but you never know. See what I mean about having had every pencil in the box out? Okay, so now it's going on a couple of hours and there's still no answer. So we had already thought about pulling the phone book and, looking to see if there was an address. in the phone book. And as it turns out, the one, because, yes, kids, there used to be things called phone booths. And in each phone booth, the phone company, attached to a cord, provided a copy of the white pages, which had everybody's phone numbers. And of course, this was before we had cell phones, or before cell phones were so widely used. And everybody's phone number was usually listed in the phone book. And so we looked in the phone book, and the page that would have had their number on it had been ripped out. But a large number of the pages in this particular phone book were missing. Well, there were a total of 4 phone booths in town. And we, over the course of the next hour, hit all 4 of those phone booths, and all 4 of the phone books had that particular page torn out. Now, by now, my imagination is running to, she has sent somebody around to remove the pages from all of these phone books in the hopes that we'll just give up and go away. Well, she doesn't know me. Because that just makes the job harder, not impossible. So we finally found them by going to the Exxon station up at the end of town and asking the guy behind the counter if he knows them. And he says, oh yeah, you just go down to the orange house and turn right, follow it back about, 3/4 of a mile. You'll see a loop, and, and take the loop, and there's a road on the other side, and go down about 800 feet, and they live, Okay, so that's what I did. And I don't know if she was shocked to see us pull up at her door or not. She was certainly courteous enough. And apparently somebody had knocked the phone off the hook in the spare bedroom. And I don't know if that was true or not. We did stay a few days, and she worked, my Aunt Lois. The first thing that I should tell you is that when I walked in the door and greeted her for the first time, it was, the family resemblance to my mother was uncanny. Absolutely uncanny. And more than a little disturbing. And so I'm, trying to sort of mentally deal with that. At the same time, I'm trying to remember my manners to be nice. And I know that she's lying to me. And there's nothing I can do about it, because she, in response to questioning, because I did question her, I did not chicken out when it came to Lois, because she would have been about 10 years old at the time that Dawn was born. And so you'd think that she would remember if her mother was pregnant. You'd think that, right? Okay, so that was the peacock blue.
This is the aquamarine. And this is the light aqua. And her only response to that was that her mother's advice to her about all kinds of things had always been that skeletons are best left in the closet where they belong. I mean, who were these people? Sprang into existence fully grown, skeletons left in the closet where they belong. Not my secrets, you know, they're not my secrets. I can't very well stomp my little foot and demand that they tell me what I want to know, or my version of what I think that they should tell me. I can really only go with what they're willing to do. And Lois was not willing to say. But she also wouldn't deny it. And because she wouldn't deny it, I was patient and willing to sort of leave it alone for right then. And so we did continue with the visit. Helen and I stayed in a motel in town that night. And the next day we went out and did some touristy things and, you know, kind of got to know one another a little bit. I figured maybe if she trusted me more, she would be willing to tell me. But that never happened. And so, other than a couple of more times, because I did make a second visit where lots of stuff did happen toward resolving the mystery, but that wouldn't be for another couple of years. And so that was, I still can't get over though. I was just absolutely convinced that she had sent somebody around to rip out the book, you know, the phone book information. And, you know, all the while the guy down at the gas station told me where they lived. Anyway, there is substantially more to this story, but I am going to stop it right there, at least telling the story, and save it for another video. After all of these people are protecting somebody's secrets. And since all the people who I know it's affected by were already dead, we have to answer the question, who were they protecting? And why? But that'll be a story for another day. Seems kind of mean to go backwards, doesn't it? But there is one you know, over the years, Dawn and I talked about it quite a bit. And one of the most poignant questions that he asked me was just a couple of years ago, when I think he realized that he passed away of ALS, of Lou Gehrig's disease, just a few months ago. And he asked me if I thought that my mother loved him.
And I told him, I said, buddy, I said, I can guarantee you that there was not a day of her life that she didn't think of you. You know? Not a single day. But those would be that was based upon a lot of things in her story that I haven't said yet. That it only, as certain memories surface, I remember what that was about, That must have been what that was about. Like, you'll not get your hands on another one. And throwing my grandmother out of the house. And the pictures always being right there. Do I think my mother loved him? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think he was probably the first thing, other than, than me, because I was, once again, had the benefit of physical proximity, was the first thing she thought about in the morning and the last thing she thought about before she went to bed. He seemed happy with that answer. Okay. Let's see. Just trying to blur these lines together. I do know that she did not leave him behind voluntarily. And that she did go back for him. But that's all part of the next story. This is the violet blue. So what I'm doing is I'm going around the outer edges, because these are meant to be like a mystic topaz. And a mystic topaz has shades of amethyst. Well, it can be a lot of different colors, but primarily it is it's a stone that almost reflects brown, but it has if you really look at it, it's got shades of amethyst and shades of aquamarine. It's a really pretty stone. It's got shades of deep fuchsia. I have one set in a ring. Okay. Oh yeah, that's pretty. And then I think on the inside of the other, I used the aquamarine, or yeah, the ultramarine. The ultramarine here. And I just traced out those lines. One of the most interesting clues that I found because there is in fact another sister who does significantly impact my life, and who I really as yet only know of as a mystery that none of these people that I've mentioned so far even knew about. And so I'll tell you about her too. But the when I was settling my mother's estate originally, and this was not something I had even thought about, but I knew that her maiden name was actually her stepfather's name. But the name on her birth certificate, which I had to order a copy of in order to settle her estate, was different. So, oh yeah, there's a lot more stories to tell. And if you are bored with these stories, or if you don't care, that's perfectly fine. Why should you? I am a perfect stranger. But who knows? Somebody may come along one day. I'm trying to get my, there it is. Trying to get my white pen to work. Who this story affects, and there are some people out there that I've never been able to find. And since I don't really talk to my nephews, or more, I guess I should say, we seem to have lost touch with one another, except for the occasional birthday greeting. Sometimes we even manage a Merry Christmas text or two. Not quite sure why that is, but okay. So, until the next one, and a little more of the story. Oh, what I was going to say, at least it'll be recorded somewhere for them to find out about. Okay, until the next time. And I think I'm going to color on this somewhat substantially off camera, simply because otherwise it's going to take us forever, considering it took an hour to do what? This stone, these, and that. So, until the next time, color something pretty. Thanks for staying with me. Bye.